Hey everyone, quick look at this. See that? Almost 98% of you watching aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing is the best way to not miss any new infidelity stories and support what we do here. It's free and it makes a huge difference. Hit that subscribe button below. Okay, now to today's story.
You ever have one of them moments? The kind that just sticks with you, like a burr on a wool sweater? Even years later, you can still feel the prickle, the awkwardness. The shame, maybe? Yeah, shame's a big part of it for me. This whole thing, with Dylan. It started with something so stupid, so accidental. I still lay awake sometimes, replaying it in my head, wondering how things could have gone different. But they didn't, did they? And now, well, now I gotta tell someone. Maybe you. Maybe just the air. Doesn't much matter anymore, I guess. It was supposed to be a nice, easy Saturday. Barbecue at Sarah's. Sarah, my best friend since, well, forever. Her youngest, Dylan, he was always a good kid. Quiet. Mostly kept to himself, you know. He was maybe 15? 16? I can't rightly remember now. Time kind of blurs together when you're trying to forget something. Anyway, the sun was hot. The burgers were burning just a little bit on the edges like Sarah always did 'em, and everyone was laughing. I'd been with Mark for, oh Lord, almost 20 years then. Comfortable, you could say. Maybe 2. Comfortable. We were all kind of milling about, kids playing in the yard, the grown-ups chatting on the patio. I remember feeling a bit sticky, you know? That summer heat just gets right under your skin. Sarah's got this little guest bathroom off the pool area. Not a proper full bath, just a toilet and a sink and one of them stand-up showers with the flimsy plastic curtain. But it was enough. I figured I'd just rinse off real quick, cool down a bit. I went inside, made sure the door was locked, double-checked even, 'cause you never know with kids running around. I turned on the water, waited for it to get warm, and stepped in. The relief was instant. That hot water just felt so good on my tired muscles. I was humming some dumb song on the radio, not a care in the world. Then it happened. The curtain. It just kind of got pulled back. Real slow, like in a bad movie. And there he was. Dylan, just standing there, his eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. Now I know what you're probably thinking. But it wasn't like that. Not at first. He didn't say nothing. Just stood there, frozen. And me? I screamed. Not a little polite yelp, but a full-on lungs-burning scream. He jumped back like he'd been electrocuted, and the curtain slammed shut. I heard him stumble away, mumbling something I couldn't make out. My heart was pounding, so hard I thought it was going to jump right out of my chest. I stood there for a minute, water still running down my face, just trying to breathe. Embarrassment washed over me in a big wave, followed by this weird, prickly feeling. Vulnerability, I guess. Like I'd been stripped bare in more ways than one. I quickly finished my shower, wrapped myself in a towel, and got out. My hands were still shaken as I dried myself off. I kept replaying his face in my head. That shocked, innocent look. Or was it innocent? That's the question that's been gnawing at me ever since. I went back outside trying to act normal. But I could feel his eyes on me. Not in a creepy way, not then. Just aware. Like we shared this secret, this awkward, embarrassing secret. Sarah was busy talking to some other moms, and Mark was over by the grill looking all content and clueless. I just wanted to disappear. Dylan kept his distance for the rest of the afternoon. If our eyes met, he'd quickly look away, a blush creeping up his neck. I tried to ignore it, to pretend it hadn't happened, but it had. And it changed things. Maybe not for him, not right away. But for me, something shifted that day. Something inside me woke up, something I thought had been asleep for good. The next few weeks were weird. I found myself thinking about Dylan more than I should have. It wasn't like I was suddenly obsessed with him or anything. It was more like he'd become a presence in my mind. Every time we were at Sarah's, I'd be hyper aware of where he was, what he was doing. And I'd catch him looking at me sometimes. A quick, furtive glance before he'd look away again. It wasn't just the embarrassment anymore. There was this undercurrent, a tension that I could feel, even if I didn't understand it. I started noticing things about him I hadn't before. The way his hair fell across his forehead when he was concentrating on something, the slight awkwardness in his smile, the way his voice was just starting to deepen. Little things. Things a woman probably shouldn't be noticing about her best friend's teenage son. I tried to push these thoughts away. I'd tell myself I was just overreacting, that it was just an awkward moment and nothing more. But the memory of his face, that split second of seeing him standing there, it kept coming back, and with it came this strange mix of feelings. Embarrassment, sure, but also something else. A flicker of something that felt forbidden. Started avoiding situations where I might be alone with him. If I went to Sarah's, I'd make sure Mark was with me. I didn't want to give anyone the wrong idea, least of all myself. But it was hard. Sarah and I were like sisters. We talked on the phone almost every day, and we saw each other at least once a week. Dylan was just always there. One time, I was helping Sarah in the kitchen getting ready for Thanksgiving dinner. Dylan came in to ask his mom a question about something for school. He didn't even look at me, just kept his eyes on Sarah. But I could feel him. It's hard to explain. It was like there was this invisible thread connecting us, a silent acknowledgement of what had happened. Later that day, after dinner, everyone was in the living room watching football. I went into the kitchen to get more coffee. As I was pouring, I heard someone behind me. It was Dylan. "Mrs. Katy?" he said, his voice a little shaky. I turned around, my heart doing that weird fluttery thing again. "Hey, Dylan," I said, trying to sound casual. He shuffled his feet, looking down at the floor. I just wanted to say I'm really sorry about, the other day. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to just brush it off, tell him it was no big deal. But it was a big deal. At least, it was to me. "It's okay, Dylan," I said finally. "Just try to be more careful next time, okay?" He nodded quickly, his face still flushed. "Yes, ma'am, I will." Then he just stood there for a second looking like he wanted to say something else. But he didn't. He just turned and walked away. That was it. That was the extent of our conversation about it. But it felt like more. Like something had been acknowledged, even if it wasn't spoken out loud. And after that, things started to change. Slowly, subtly. After that little apology, Dylan started being different around me. Not in a bad way. He was still quiet and polite, but there was a new kind of awareness in his eyes. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me, not with that shocked look from before, but with curiosity, maybe even a little bit of something else. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And if I'm being honest, I started looking at him differently too. I'd noticed the way his muscles were starting to fill out, how his voice was getting deeper. He was still a kid, but he was also growing up. And I couldn't help but notice. It was so confusing. I loved Sarah. She was my best friend. And Dylan was like a nephew to me in a way. These feelings I was having, they felt wrong, morally wrong. But they were there, bubbling beneath the surface, no matter how hard I tried to ignore them. Afternoon, I was at Sarah's helping her with some gardening. Dylan was outside too, shooting hoops in the driveway. I was on my knees, pulling weeds, when I looked up and saw him. The sun was behind him, making his hair look all golden. He was sweaty, his t-shirt clinging to his chest. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, I felt this pull, this unexpected surge of something. It scared me. It really scared me. I quickly looked back down at the weeds, my heart pounding, in my chest. I told myself it was just the heat, or maybe I was just tired. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I started finding excuses not to go to Sarah's as often. I'd say I was busy with work, or that Mark and I had plans. Sarah didn't seem to notice anything was wrong, thankfully. But I felt guilty. Guilty for avoiding my friend, and guilty for the thoughts that kept creeping into my head. Then, one evening, Sarah called me really upset. Her old dog, Buster, had passed away. I knew how much that dog meant to her. I couldn't not go over there. When I got to her house, Sarah was a mess, crying on the couch. Dylan was there too, sitting beside her, his arm around her shoulders. He looked up when I came in, and our eyes met. There was a sadness in his eyes that mirrored my own guilt and confusion. I sat down next to Sarah and held her hand. We talked. For a while, reminiscing about Buster. Dylan mostly stayed quiet, just offering his mom a comforting squeeze every now and then. Later, when Sarah went upstairs to lie down, I was in the kitchen making a cup of tea. Dylan came in. "She's really sad," he said softly. "I know," I replied. Buster was a good dog. We stood there in silence for a moment. Then Dylan said, "Thanks for coming over, Mrs. Katy." "Of course, honey," I said. "Sarah's my best friend." He nodded. Then he did something that surprised me. He looked right at me, his eyes clear and direct. "It wasn't your fault," he said. I frowned, confused. "What wasn't my fault?" He hesitated for a moment, then said, "You know, what happened in the bathroom?" My breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what to say. He continued, his voice barely a whisper. "I shouldn't have. I didn't mean to." "I know, Dylan," I said softly. "It was an accident. But was it?" That's what I kept wondering. Was it really just an accident? Or was there something more to it? Something that neither of us wanted to admit? After that night, the air between Dylan and me felt different. Lighter, maybe? Like acknowledging the awkwardness had somehow eased the tension. He started talking to me more, not just polite little greetings, but actual conversations. We'd talk about his school, his friends, his video games. He even asked me for advice on a school project once. I enjoyed these conversations. He was a smart kid, with a dry sense of humor that I actually found quite funny. Sometimes he'd say something that would make me laugh out loud, and I'd forget for a moment the weirdness of our situation. But then the guilt would creep back in. I'd remember that he was Sarah's son, that he was still just a kid, and I'd pull back, try to create some distance. But he seemed to sense it, and he'd pull back too. It was this strange dance, this push and pull that neither of us seemed to be able to control. One afternoon, I was at Sarah's, and she asked me to help Dylan with his math homework. I wasn't particularly good at math, but Sarah was busy with something else, and Dylan was clearly struggling. We sat at the kitchen table together, his textbook open in front of us. He was frowning, chewing on the end of his pen. I tried my best to explain the concepts, but he just didn't seem to be getting it. "It's just not making sense," he said, frustrated. I leaned closer, pointing to a problem in the book. "Okay, look at it this way." As I was explaining, my hand brushed against his. It was just a brief touch, but it sent a jolt through me. I quickly pulled my hand away, my cheeks feeling hot. Dylan didn't seem to notice. He was still focused on the problem. But I was suddenly very aware of how close we were sitting, of the way his hair smelled, of the slight tremor in my own hands. We finished the homework eventually, and Dylan seemed to understand it a little better. But I was flustered. That little touch had stirred up all those confusing feelings again, stronger than before. Later that week, Sarah had to go out of town for a few days to take care of her sick mother. She asked if I could check in on Dylan a couple of times just to make sure he was okay. Mark was away on a business trip, so I was home alone anyway. I hesitated, but I couldn't really say no to Sarah. The first time I went over, Dylan was fine. He was just playing video games in his room. I made sure he had dinner and then left. The second time, he seemed a little down. He said he was missing his mom. We ended up talking for a while, just sitting in the living room. He told me about his worries about school, about his friends. He seemed so young and vulnerable in that moment, and then he said something that really surprised me. He said, "You're a good friend to my mom, Mrs. Katy." "She's a good friend to me too, Dylan," I replied. He looked at me then, and There was something in his eyes, something that made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't the innocent curiosity I'd seen before. It was something more intense, something that made me feel both excited and terrified. He didn't say anything else. He just held my gaze for a moment longer, and then looked away. But that look, it stayed with me long after I left his house that night. It was like a silent question, a silent acknowledgement of the strange connection that had formed between us. And I knew, deep down, that things were about to get even more complicated. Sarah came back a few days later, and things went back to, well, not normal exactly, but to the way they were before she left. Dylan and I still talked sometimes, but there was a new layer of unspoken understanding between us. That look he gave me, it had changed something. In both of us, I think. I started having these dreams. Not explicit or anything, just dreams where Dylan was there, and there was this feeling of closeness. It was unsettling. I'd wake up feeling confused and guilty. I knew I had to do something. This couldn't keep going on. It wasn't fair to Sarah. It wasn't fair to Dylan, and it certainly wasn't fair to Mark. But most of all, it wasn't fair to myself. I was caught in this web of confusing emotions, and I didn't know how to get out. One afternoon, I was at Sarah's, and Dylan came into the kitchen while I was helping her put away groceries. "Hey, Mrs. Katy," he said. "Hey, Dylan," I replied, trying to sound casual. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Can I talk to you for a minute? Outside?" I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I knew this was it. This was the moment where everything would either change or stay the same, and I wasn't sure which one I was more afraid of. We went out to the back porch. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. Dylan stood there for a moment, looking out at the trees. Then he turned to me. I know this is probably wrong," he started, his voice a little shaky. "But I think I have feelings for you." My heart sank. I knew this was coming, but hearing him say it out loud, it made it so much more real, so much more dangerous. I took a deep breath. "Dylan," I said softly, "you're a sweet kid, and I care about you too. But you're young, and I'm with Mark." He nodded, looking down at his feet. "I know. It's just, ever since, the bathroom thing. I just haven't been able to stop thinking about you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt a strange sense of validation. Like maybe I hadn't been imagining things all this time. But the other part of me felt a wave of panic. This was wrong. So wrong. "Dylan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What happened in the bathroom? It was an accident. And these feelings you're having, they're probably just a crush. It happens. But it's not real. Not in the way you think it is." He looked up at me, his eyes full of a kind of desperate hope. "But what if it is real?" I shook my head. "It can't be, Dylan. I'm with Mark. And Sarah. She's my best friend. I would never do anything to hurt her. Or you." He was silent for a moment, his face etched with disappointment. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said quietly. "I understand." But I could see in his eyes that he didn't really understand. And that was the hardest part. I knew I had to be firm. I had to set boundaries. For his sake, for Sarah's sake, and for my own. "Dylan," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "What you're feeling, it's not appropriate, and we can't talk about this anymore. Do you understand?" He nodded again, his gaze still downcast. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," I said. "Now let's just forget this ever happened, okay? We can still be friends, but that's all we can be." He didn't say anything. He just turned and walked back into the house. I stood there on the porch for a long time, watching the last of the sun disappear below the horizon. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I had done the right thing. I knew I had. But it still hurt. It hurt to see the disappointment in his eyes, and it hurt to admit, even to myself, that there had been a part of me, a small, foolish part, that had felt something too. That was the end of it. We never spoke about it again. Things went back to normal, or as close to normal as they could be. Dylan grew up, went off to college, moved away. I stayed with Mark. We're still together. But sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I still think about Dylan. I wonder if he ever thinks about me. And I wonder what might have happened if things had been different. If that stupid shower curtain hadn't been pulled back that day. But then I remember Sarah and Mark and the life I've built. And I know deep down that I made the right choice, even if it still stings a little bit, even now. Life went on like it always does. The sun still came up in the morning, and the bills still showed up in the mail. On the surface, things looked pretty much the same. I still went to Sarah's. We still had our coffee and our chats. Dylan was around, but things were different. He was polite, like always, but he kept his distance. Didn't look me in the eye much anymore. And I didn't push it. I figured that was for the best. But inside me, things were still kinda churning. That conversation on the porch, it had stirred up a lot of stuff. I kept replaying it in my head, wondering if I'd said the right thing, if I'd been too harsh, if I'd given him the wrong impression somehow. It was like trying to untangle a fishing line that's all knotted up. The more you mess with it, the worse it seems to get. Mark didn't notice anything, of course. He was always kinda oblivious to that kind of stuff. He was happy, I guess. Content. And I tried to be too. I'd make an extra effort to be affectionate, to talk to him about his day. But sometimes, when he'd be watching TV or reading the paper, my mind would drift back to Dylan, to that look in his eyes. It was weird. I wasn't, like, in love with Dylan or anything. It was more like a connection. A strange, unexpected connection that had formed out of that awkward, embarrassing moment. And now that it had been acknowledged, even if it was shut down, it was still there, lingering in the air between us. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Like how Dylan would sometimes look over at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Not in a creepy way, just a glance, a quick check. And if our eyes met, he'd quickly look away, a little flicker of something in his expression that I couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe? Or just awkwardness? One time we were all at Sarah's, for Dylan's high school graduation party. He looked so grown up in his suit, shaking hands with all the relatives. I watched him from across the yard, feeling this strange mix of pride and something else. Melancholy, maybe. Knowing that he was moving on, growing up, and that our paths were destined to stay separate. Later that evening, when the party was winding down, I was in the kitchen, helping Sarah clean up. Dylan came in, carrying a stack of empty plates. "Hey, Mrs. Katy," he said, his voice a little deeper than I remembered. "Hey, graduate," I said, smiling. "Big day, huh?" He nodded, putting the plates down. "Yeah, it's weird." Stood there for a moment, just the two of us, surrounded by the remnants of the party. Then he looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, he held my gaze. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" I asked, confused. He shrugged a little. "For everything. For being a good friend to Mom. For, you know." I knew what he meant. And for a brief moment, I considered saying something to acknowledge the strange connection we had shared. But then Sarah came back into the kitchen, and the moment passed. "Everything all right in here?" she asked, smiling. "Yeah, Mom," Dylan said, "just saying thanks." He gave me a quick, almost imperceptible nod, and then went back outside. I watched him go, feeling a lump in my throat. That was it, I realized. That was the closest we'd ever come to talking about it again. And maybe that was okay. Maybe some things are better left unsaid. But still, every now and then, When I'm sitting on my porch swing in the evening watching the fireflies, my mind wanders back to those strange few months, to that accidental glimpse in the bathroom, and the unexpected feelings that followed. It was a confusing time, a time of unexpected desires and unspoken words, a time that reminded me that even in the most comfortable of lives, there can still be surprises. And sometimes those surprises can change you in ways you never thought possible. Years went by. Dylan went off to college, then moved to the city for a job. He'd come back to visit Sarah every now and then, and I'd see him. We'd exchange polite greetings, maybe chat for a few minutes about the weather or his work. But that was it. The awkwardness had faded over time, replaced by a kind of quiet understanding. Like we both knew something had happened, but we'd both agreed to leave it in the past. Sarah and I remained as close as ever. She never knew anything about what had gone on between Dylan and me, and I intended to keep it that way. It was our secret, a strange little chapter in our lives that no one else needed to read. Mark and I, well, we continued on. Life settled into a comfortable routine. We traveled a bit, spent time with friends, but sometimes I'd look at him, and I'd wonder if he ever sensed that there was a part of me that he didn't fully know. A part of me that had been awakened, however briefly, by an unexpected connection. I got older. My hair started to turn gray, and the wrinkles around my eyes got a little deeper. Dylan grew into a man. I saw pictures of him on Sarah's Facebook page. Tall, handsome, with a confident smile. He looked happy. And that made me happy too. One day Sarah called me, her voice a little choked up. Dylan was getting married. She was so excited, showing me pictures of his fiancée, a lovely young woman with a bright smile. I told Sarah how happy I was for them. A few months later, I got an invitation to the wedding. It was a destination wedding, somewhere far away. Mark and I decided not to go. It felt like the right decision. Some chapters are meant to be closed, and some connections are meant to remain in the realm of what-ifs. But on the day of the wedding, I found myself thinking about Dylan. I imagined him standing at the altar, his eyes full of love for his bride. And I smiled. He had found his happiness. That night, I was sitting on my porch swing, just like I often did. The stars were out, and the air was still and quiet. I thought back to that summer day, so many years ago, when a silly accident had led to a strange and confusing awakening. I thought about the awkward conversations, the unspoken feelings, the difficult decision I had made, and I realized that even though that chapter of my life was closed, it had still left its mark on me. It had reminded me that life is full of surprises, that feelings can be complex and unexpected, and that sometimes the most important thing is to do what you believe is right, even when it's hard. I looked up at the stars, a small smile playing on my lips. Life might not always be easy, and it certainly isn't always predictable, but it's always interesting. And sometimes the most unexpected connections can teach you the most about yourself. And maybe that should be enough. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any new infidelity story.